understandably, your focus has been on the federal level, but do you know if similar things are happening in the provincial ministries?
Yeah, that's a great question. We would love to focus, like our mandate isn't just at the federal government, we do hope to focus provincially. It's just obviously the federal level is where everything's happening right now. I've heard really bad things coming out of BC. I've heard bad things in Alberta. So yeah, it doesn't look good on the provincial front either. I know recently we had a little bit of a win in BC. There's a group called the Therapeutics Initiative, and what they did was independent drug research and drug training for doctors. So most doctors get almost all of their training on pharmaceuticals from pharmaceutical companies. And so the Therapeutics Initiative actually researches how effective the drugs really are. And does training, and they had their funding cut by the BC government, and so us and a few other groups, signed an open letter about that, and they actually did reverse it and refunded it. So yeah, there's also a ton going on at the provincial levels.
Do you see a danger that interventions such as muzzling could be extended to all research funded by federal funding agencies?
Yes. I've talked to quite a few academic scientists who are concerned about speaking out, who have felt, they felt what could be repercussions. Of course, it's always hard to know whether, when your NSERC is not renewed and you've been very outspoken for the last few years, you can't say for certain that it's because you were outspoken, but I've heard probably at least 5 anecdotal accounts of people being affected, possibly for speaking out. So, it's not something that we can prove, but it's a concern. I think I saw this hand first.
Do you have anything planned, like rallies or activities for the upcoming CSS community?
When is it?
May 25th to 29th.
Ah, interesting.
The societies.
Yes, there's potential there for sure.
You want to volunteer?
So we don't currently have a rally plan for this year. Kind of the thing is you have to kind of keep it fresh every year. You can't really just repeat what you did. So what we're actually thinking on in terms of an actual on the ground action this year is the NDP science critic put forward a motion for a parliamentary science officer. And actually before they put forward the motion, this was actually proposed by Scott Finley, who's the co-founder of Bldg. So the second reading on that bill to implement a parliamentary science officer. So this would be someone sort of like the parliamentary budget officer to sort of oversee the government's and how the government is handling science. So we're trying to get more details on when the next reading of that might be, and we think that might be a really good opportunity for actual on-the-ground campaigning. So we could actually, do things at MPs' offices to try to get them to vote in favor of implementing this new science office. So that's sort of what we have planned, but the challenge there is we have no idea when the voting and reading of it are going to be. So that makes it hard to plan a national action, but that's sort of what we have in mind.
Yeah, I'm part of the group that helped organize the local activity in Montreal. And yeah, I guess I'm a bit surprised that you're not planning something else because, I mean, basically it seems like in probably 18 cities you've got people that have met each other and got something organized, and you don't want to let that kind of dissipate. So I think you should be trying to organize regular things. Obviously, you want to make some changes. I'm not saying do exactly the same thing, but I think there's a lot of potential for growing the organization that way.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's sort of what we're thinking around this bill. Is so instead of just a rally, actually something. So part of the thing with the rallies, it was very open-ended. So we're thinking we could still do something similar, but very specific on trying to get your local MP to vote in favor of this bill. So it could be an actual demonstration at the MP's office, sort of So that's sort of what we're thinking. We're just trying to get a feeling for if they have any idea when the vote on it is going to be. So it's just the timing that makes the challenge.
But what was your evaluation, assessment of this, the September 16th event?
That's a good question. So pros and cons. I mean, the pro is that it did succeed in getting a lot of national media attention. You know, there's always that concern that it won't, but it did. It got covered in all the major news outlets, so that was a success. The other thing is when you do something like that is it almost gives the media sort of more permission to cover the science stories again and again. And even when they cover them again, you know, they can always reference that. You know, last September, scientists rallied all over the country. So it just sort of adds so much more oomph to the story, you know, even continually. I mean, people are still, you know, quoting the death of evidence rally. The con was that I think with the science issue, we're really trying to, science advocacy is a very delicate sort of topic. We're aware that there's so much importance that comes with the scientific reputation, and we're trying not to sort of tarnish that. I think part of the reason that this issue gets so much more attention than other rallies is because it is scientists, and so we're trying to not have it sort of you know, co-opted. We don't want scientists to be labeled as one of those groups that is just always out on the street, you know, protesting everything. And also, so, you know, we're also really concerned with what people say at the rallies and things like that. So, you know, I didn't hear anything wrong with the Montreal rally, but part of the thing with rallies in 18 cities is, you know, there's a very sort of grassroots component to it, and we can't control what people say at all of them. And there were some things of, you know, people dressed up as Harper, you know, doing sort of Hail Hitler motions and things like that. So it's more concerned around that it's, you know, it can be effective, but there's also a risk there. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned earlier that you would wish that there was some sort of science hypothesis earlier than the one that you're talking about. But I wonder, is that really true? Because there's something that seems very clear with the current government is that they are very steadfast and completely ignoring what's going on. They're paying no attention. It seems that they're just going on with their policy and they're ignoring it. Do you see any signs that they actually are paying attention?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's part of the problem is that by the time we really got active, they had already pretty much got science in Canada. You know, in that first omnibus budget bill, I mean, that one really did a doozy. There wasn't that much else to cut after it. But shortly after that, the government had been saying a few times that they were going to reopen SARA, the Species at Risk Act, which is really one of the only pieces of environmental legislation that's left to be tampered with. So they had said a few times that they were going to make some changes to it, and that never happened. So you know, it's hard to know really what the effects are, but I do think that they certainly weren't expecting the scientific community to be as vocal as it has, and so I think, you know, that may have prevented further changes. Yeah. But I think it's also about, even if we can't change this government, which is very likely, it's about also showing, you know, the other parties that this is an issue that people care about and that we're going to be vocal about it, so that, you know, hopefully, if we did get a different government, you know, we would want whoever forms the new government to really make this a priority. And that's really what happened in the U.S. And that is really thanks a lot to the Union of Concerned Scientists in the U.S. So that really, you know, Obama really made science a top priority when he got elected. So, yeah. Yes.
This is perhaps a good follow-up to that. I guess it's really important to maintain non-partisanship through this process, but have you seen any interest from any other political parties in potentially the research going on in Simon Fraser or other work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, part of the reason I'm so passionate about this issue and think that it can be so important is that I really think it is an issue that does go across party lines. You know, despite the fact that a lot of the policies that we don't like are coming from a conservative government. There are a lot of former conservatives, former conservative fisheries ministers, a famous former conservative pollster who have been speaking out against these policies as well. So I think, it is an issue that really does actually go across a lot of the party lines. Certainly all of the NDP, the Liberals, and the Green Party have all been, very proactive with working with us and with sort of trying to further these causes. But it is a challenge as well because, we don't want to appear partisan at all, and, we would be happy to work with the Conservatives as well if they were open to it.
So I guess the end point of what you're trying to do is to affect parliamentary change, like a parliamentary action to affect change. And I was just wondering, what kind of initiative do you have that actually tracks parliamentary initiatives that pertain to like science budgeting or science policy? I know that the American Association of was it the American AAAS has a weekly newsletter on all the markups that are going on in Congress, going around research and science issues. And I was just wondering if like a similar thing happens in Canada, or if you're kind of the organization that would be doing something like that.
Yeah, partly. That's partly what we're doing right now with trying to facilitate more engagement in the consultation period for the revised science strategy. We kind of have the opportunity right now where the government is saying, hey, tell us what you think about our science policies. So it's, a perfect opportunity to encourage input. And so, our organization is submitting formal comments on that as well. Certainly we have, on our email list, we sort of send out any updates of what's happening in Canada with respect to science policies. It's not that frequent that there are bills and things that are that directly related to science, but certainly we, report on the ones that do come up. There's sort of two ways that you can go about influencing change in policy. One is sort of directly through the government, and then the second is through the public. And both are necessary, but we sort of felt like right now, given the attitudes of the current government, that we wouldn't really get very far by sort of going through that direct route. So right now we've been focusing more on getting the public support to put pressure on the government that way.
We have time for one more question.
So in the same way that terrorism essentially created a fear and an annihilation of human rights in a lot of places, how much do you think the economic impact in the last 10 years have had on the business policies to looking at scientific information on their economics and on the public as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of, certainly the rationale that is given for a lot of these cuts and closures is, the budget that, it's austerity, we have to, cut budgets across the board. But for most of these examples, I really think that's just an excuse. You have the example of the census where the new one costs more and is useless. You have examples like the ELA where their operating budget was only $2 million a year, which is really nothing. And even with ELA, they had actually given a number of scientists, but one in particular, a grant to study silver nanoparticles at the ELA. So they were funding a scientist to do research that could only be conducted at the ELA, and then not letting him in to do his research. So, the fiscal argument doesn't make a lot of sense. I know in other countries, they've actually been increasing their science spending even as they've been decreasing other budgets. That's been the case in the US and in the UK. If you think of it, now that I run an organization, I think of it in terms of, if we have to cut money, I'm going to cut the fundraising budget last because that's the budget that makes more money. And so that's sort of how I think of the science budget as well. That, that's the last one that you want to cut because that really is the driver of your economy. So I think it's provided a really good sort of scapegoat for a lot of these policies, but I don't really think it's the root of it.
So those are fantastic questions, and it's obvious that there's a lot of interest and energy involved in this topic. So my closing remarks are that I think it's important for us all to recognize that we in this room are among the most informed, the most educated members of society. And saying that scares me too. We are also funded by taxpayers. They subsidize this room, they pay for our research, they pay for our scholarships. And the kind of science we're talking about affects everybody's life every single day. So I think there was one question at the beginning about what we can do and how we can talk to the general public. And I think one powerful way to do that is to tell personal stories. So how does this affect you as a scientist? How does this affect your research or your DFO collaborator? Or for instance, as a scientist, what if McGill was telling us what we could and could not publish? What if the dean came and read my thesis and should I be so lucky, and said, actually, Erin, you can't say any of these things, or you can't talk to a reporter. Another comment is that we should sign up for things like these networks of experts. It's we are the experts in many cases, and it's also a good experience for us to get involved in policy and to talk to the media. And the last one is to call your MP. I call my MP and Stephen Harper on speed dial when I'm walking home up the hill, so I'm huffing and puffing. And it's really easy. You call him and leave a message, and you just say, I'm Erin Jacob, I live in Montreal. Don't say Erin Jacob. I live in Montreal, and I am concerned about these things. Thank you very much. It's really important that we do
Mailing
that.
to MPs is also free.
Mailing, yes, writing a letter to your MP is also free. You don't need a stamp.
You can also, and the thing is, they don't actually get that many phone calls. You can also try to get a meeting with them, and they rarely turn them down. So especially if you're persistent, and people don't do that. Very few people actually do that. So that really is so important for showing them that this is an issue people care about. And I'll just add, that was amazingly well said, especially about the fact that you guys are the most informed. So many times, I talk to scientists and grad students, academic scientists, and they're so hesitant to actually do media interviews. Even though we are the most informed, because we're scientists, we so clearly are aware of what we don't know. So I find scientists are so hesitant to actually speak about these things. They always say, no, I'm not good at it. Somebody else is more knowledgeable. Someone else knows it better. But we need more scientists to actually to speak out. You guys are all absolutely the most well informed. So you guys have to be the ones to actually speak about it.
We have media training at McGill, so if you wanted to know more about that, come and talk to me, send me an email. But please join me in thanking Katie for a fantastic